The LA Kings host the Edmonton Oilers tonight in a huge game as the 2022-23 regular season is winding down. We'll get into that big matchup and look ahead to the playoffs and even back at this past season with former LA Kings player and current LA Kings radio analyst Daryl Evans on this edition of Locked on LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked on LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked on LA Kings your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. My name is Eddie Garcia. I'm your host of Locked on LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for almost 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network, also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 16 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for 30 years. The Kings host the Edmonton Oilers in a huge game tonight for both teams. Kings enter the game against the Oilers tonight 1 point up on Edmonton in the battle for home ice advantage in the first round of the playoffs. To join us to talk about that game and more, we welcome in former Kings forward and current Kings radio analyst Daryl Evans to the show. Daryl, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. How are you?
I'm great, Eddie. Always great talking to you. It's a fun time of year. It's always exciting in this time of year, and Kings have got themselves in a real battle right now, which brings the games a little more intensity to the games right now.
No doubt about that. And of course, you can always hear Daryl on the LA Kings iHeart Audio Network with the great Nick Nixon calling all of the games, which they will do tonight as well. But before we get into that big matchup tonight, I know the Kings are dealing with some injuries right now. Kevin Fiala, Gabe Vilardi, as far as the forwards, defenseman Mikey Anderson, Alex Edler. From what I understand, at the morning skate this morning, Todd McClellan was asked about it, and he was a little bit grumpy. Russell Morgan of Hockey Royalty tweeted out that McClellan was asked about an injury update, and he said, quote, "The players that aren't in the lineup tonight won't be in the lineup tonight, and I don't know where they'll be tomorrow," end quote. So not very revealing, and I don't know if that's encouraging, but I get, Daryl, you played next man up and all that stuff. I get it. And I know you're not a doctor, but I'm going to ask you, do you feel optimistic about some of the injury issues with the Kings right now, that these players could be back for the playoffs, or are you not sure at this point?
Yeah, I am optimistic, and that probably leads to the way Todd McClellan has dealt with things leading up to today's conversation at the pregame skate this morning. He's probably been a little bit more revealing that the injuries maybe weren't long-term, that the guys were, going to be able to make a return. He didn't give any specific timelines or dates or anything like that. I think the Kings are in a place of luxury right now, having clinched the playoff spot, that they don't have to rush these guys back. And I think they'll use the side of caution right now, make sure you get these guys healthy. They're also a team that's very, they trust the depth that they have. You look what they went through last year. No team went through more injuries than the Kings did last year. Next man up, mentality type of thing. And that's the case tonight. They'll go with the same forward lineup that they had the other night. And, Toby Bjornfoot, he'll step in on defense, and he's very familiar with the Kings, the system they play. He's played a lot of games with them, and he's very familiar with the Edmonton Oilers as well. So it's just, I don't want to say it's just another game, but it's another game from the players, the coaching staff, and the players to get themselves prepared for and to trust that group that they have in the locker room.
Now, each of the players that we mentioned that are dealing with the injuries are important in their own way, but I did want to ask you, looking towards the playoffs, do you feel like in general, or the Kings specifically, would be better off or would have a better time of it if they had a Kevin Fiala, who's the leading scorer, or is it more important in the playoffs to have more of a shutdown defenseman like a Mikey Anderson?
Well, I think both have, great value to the team. I don't think you prioritize one over the other. I think when you look at the defensive play of this team, it's not basically based on individual play, nor is the offense based on individual play. All guys contribute in their own way. Mikey Anderson, definitely a great shutdown defenseman along with Drew Doughty in that pairing. But what it's done with his injury in particular, it's given the Kings a chance to pair up Gavrikov and Doughty to see how they perform together. Might be something that you might have to use in the playoffs. In particular games, you're protecting a 1-goal lead. There's a penalty or something that comes up. So it's an opportunity for them to be able to explore that. Edler's experience, a guy back in the blue line, you can't understate that, his presence in the locker room, but he also has the presence around the team on a day-to-day basis. Even last year when he was injured, the impact that he had on the team on those young defensemen. Kevin Fiala, he's one of those guys that's irreplaceable. He's got great value to this hockey club. The elements that he brings to the team is puck handling ability, puck protection, the vision that he has on the ice. There's no doubt that he'll be missed. But again, it's an opportunity for other guys to be able to step up and get an opportunity. And this is where some of these young guys, or players down in the lineup, they crave for these opportunities. So it's a chance for them to get on the big stage. And that's not to say that they're going to replace guys like Kevin Fiala, but it's also a chance for those guys to go in and perform. And I think what happens from the coaching staff standpoint, they get guys that are auditioning, try to make a show and make a name for themselves. So it can be a win-win. I mean, again, you can't understate you're going to miss these guys, but hey, they're not there, and you've got to go with what you got in the locker room. And I think the players understand that, the coaches understand that. Every team goes through it. The Kings aren't the only team that's a little bit banged up right now. Let's face it, they've played almost 80 games this season. Everybody's all banged up, bruised up. It's been a hard battle all the way through, and yet the battle has just begun.
The goaltending situation is certainly an interesting one between Phoenix Copley and Jonas Korpisalo. Copley apparently is getting the start tonight against the Oilers. Do you feel like a decision needs to be made on who's the number one guy at some point before we get to the playoffs? Or do you think the Kings can, I know they're comfortable with both guys, but do you think there has to be kind of a declaration at some point that this is the guy we're going with to start or not?
I don't think it's a must situation right now, again, because of the comfort that, both players or both the goalies have from the team. And, when they're in the net, the players have done a great job at supporting either with offense and defensive play. The Kings are having one of the best years, defensively and with regards to blocking shots, franchise history. And that goes all the way to the forwards. You look at Anze Kopitar, you look at him, the amount of years, the amount of games that he's played, the value that he has at his hockey club, and yet he's second in the NHL in forwards and block shots, only by 3 shots, trailing Austin Matthews for the top spot. So, he's committed, he's bought in. And when it comes back to, making that selection and goal, I think it's probably something that the coaches in the back of their mind, they have a little bit of a blueprint, a plan as to the way they want to approach the postseason. But I still think there's a little bit of jockeying around going on in that position. I think probably by the time we get to Monday, I think the coaching staff will have a better indication as to where they are for those last couple of games next week. And I would not be surprised to see the guy that gets those 2 games possibly next week to be the starter when the postseason comes about.
Let's get into the specific matchup against the Oilers tonight. Of course, the 2 teams met in the playoffs last year. It went 7 games. The way it's currently slotted, they would meet in the first round of the playoffs this year. Kings have won 2 of the 3 matchups so far this season. They were shut out 2-0 in Edmonton last week. Oilers have won 4 in a row and 9 of 10, and we know they have 2 superstars in Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. What makes this team, Edmonton, so good, other than the obvious, and what are maybe some of the strengths and the weaknesses you've seen so far in the matchups against the Kings?
Well, the strength that they have is, their offensive ability. And it's not just 1 or 2 guys. I mean, McDavid, Draisaitl, those 2 guys, a 1-2 punch up the middle of the ice. You put them on the ice together. You look at Nugent Hopkins, who's having a career year. He's going to be probably going to tip, the 100-point plateau for the first time in his career. They got 430 goal scorers already in their hockey club. So they're a very deep hockey club. The addition of Ekholm back on the blue line definitely brought an element that team needed. Bukestad up the middle of the ice gives them some size. So they're a different team than the Kings played last year in the postseason, as are the Kings. The Kings didn't have Victor Arvidsson. They didn't have Drew Doughty in that series last year. And obviously the goalies are different from last year. But it's a team that, I think they've matured, Edmonton, in the experience that they got last year in the postseason. And the Kings have matured as well. Now it's a matter of, getting back on that stage again. There's no doubt that the Edmonton Oilers are a little bit more prepared for that and with regards to the experience that they gained last year. But I think the Kings, through the way that they've played this year, it's been basically playoff hockey for a long period of time. So if it is the matchup, Oilers will play to their strength, and that's their scoring and offense. They try to outscore their mistakes. And from the Kings standpoint, it's tight defense, take advantage of the other team's mistakes or things that you force. You look at the last game in Edmonton that the Oilers won 2-0. It was a tight hockey game as the score reflects, but the Kings had enough quality chances to be able to win that hockey game. In net, Skinner had an outstanding game. And the Kings have to find a way to beat the goaltender. They missed opportunities, and and that's how tight the games are. So I think the team that capitalizes on their opportunities is going to have an edge. Special teams, Edmonton number 1 on the power play. Kings are number 4 right now, but they've been as high as number 2 there. Going 1-2 with the Oilers when they met up last week, and special teams will play a factor. You look at the season series. Kings penalty kill has been perfect against the Oilers. They've killed off all 9 Oiler power plays. You go back the last 7 games, the Kings in the regular season have not allowed a goal in 20 penalties against the Oilers. So, it's going to be a chess match out there. And again, opportunities, definitely you got to take away time and space from McDavid and Draisaitl. They're game breakers. But I think the Kings have a couple of guys in their roster now that they can do that. Guys like Fiala, he's that type of player. Maybe doesn't have the numbers that Draisaitl and McDavid have, but he definitely is a difference maker. He's a game changer. Gabe Vilardi's found a different level in his game. Maturity of Adrian Kempe, again, everybody thought last year maybe it was just a one and done type of year. He's a better player this year than he was last year. So I think they match up quite well. And if they do come across each other again in the postseason, it's going to be one hell of a series.
We're going to have more with LA Kings radio analyst Daryl Evans in just a moment. But real quick, I want to remind you that today's episode of Locked on LA Kings is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA season is winding down, and it's the perfect time to download the FanDuel app, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back when your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from money line to points scored to three-pointers made. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss your chance on your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So we were back with Daryl Evans. And Daryl, the last time we spoke was at the All-Star break, and the Kings have been amongst the best teams in the league as far as record and points scored since the All-Star break, 17-4-3. What's the biggest reason in your mind the team has been able to really get going in the second half of the season?
It's been dialing and playing a defensive game, playing to their identity. I think in the early part of the year, we probably talked about it before, was the addition of Kevin Fiala, the emergence of Adrian Kempe, Gabe Vilardi getting off to a real solid start, Danault, Arvidsson coming last year. The Kings, there's no doubt they've produced more offense, successful power play. But I think they got caught up in playing in those run and gun games. And it wasn't until they really started to dial in defensively that they understand what it's going to take in order to not only get into the postseason, but to have success in the postseason. And, they're committed. They block more shots than any team in franchise history. For the Kings, that is. They're 6th in the league in block shots. They do a lot of the little things and the little sacrifices. Pay attention to detail, and especially when you're led by your top guys, Anze Kopitar, Drew Doughty, Philip Danault, these guys here, they're all bought into a 200-foot game. So now the young guys that are coming along, and Quentin Byfield's a great example of one. He got moved to the wing on the Kopitar line, and how much the detail in his game has improved from a year ago. He's a completely different player. He now plays to his size. He's getting involved in the bumps and grinds along the boards, winning those battles, taking a little bit of that pressure off of Kopitar and Kempe. And now he just needs to bring the finish to his game. And when he brings the finish to his game, he's going to be one heck of a hockey player. So, it's going to be a battle. But I think, from the mental standpoint, there's a lot of confidence. And there's a belief there. There's a lot of trust in the coaching staff. They've got trust in the goaltending, and it's come together nicely. But it's been collectively as a group, contributions from a lot of different guys. Carl Grundstrom, who's got 6 goals in his last 13 games, timely goals. One he scores in Seattle the other night, picks the pocket of Tanev to go in and give the Kings a little bit of a cushion. It ends up being the game-winning goal at the end of the night. But one heck of an individual effort out there. And those are the little things that, sometimes they go unnoticed by the mass audience, but teammates, coaches, opposition, they respect those type of little plays that are difference makers at this time of year.
We also haven't talked to you since the trade that sent Jonathan Quick to Columbus and eventually Vegas. And we're hearing that Quick is not expected to start against the Kings in the big game Thursday in Vegas. We'll see if that's the case or not. I think maybe some Kings fans are relieved by that with their divided loyalties. But it was an earth-shaking trade. You're obviously dealing away one of the greatest Kings in franchise history. And there was maybe amongst some a concern as to what that would have an effect in the locker room. But have you been surprised at all how the Kings have been able to kind of put that situation behind them and move on and do so well so quickly?
I think that's a testament to the leadership group on the team. I think that Anze Kopitar and Drew Doughty, I'll bring Edler into the group just because of his veteran experience. But those two guys in particular, I think had a real negative effect in their play that may have dragged the team down. But I just think it shows the professionalism of those two guys those two individuals in particular. We all know that it's part of the game, but you hate to see a guy like Jonathan Quick go. Anybody that's been in LA and followed the Kings, understand what he's meant to this franchise. There's things that he's done for this franchise that some of those records will never get touched. Just his presence in the locker room, in the way the team performed in front of him. So it's a real, it's a tough thing to do, but again, we all know it's part of the game. And, for his standpoint, I'm glad that, he didn't have to, finish the season off in Columbus. I'm glad that he got to a team that was playing in meaningful games and then he was able to, all of a sudden get a little bit of energy. He was playing there on a consistent basis when they had their goaltending injuries. And he put himself up into the number 2 spot for wins by American-born goaltender. So, I couldn't be more happy for him in that regard. If and when these two teams do come together, whether it's the game on Thursday night in Vegas or in the postseason, and Jonathan Quick is between the pipes, against his old teammates. It's going to be a tough one, but it's one of those things that you never thought would ever happen, but it happened. And from the Kings standpoint, you have to look at where it's put the Kings. The key piece being they really needed to get that left shot defenseman, and Gavrikov has given them everything that they could imagine. Back in that position. No coincidence that the last 15 games now, the Kings have allowed 2 or fewer goals in 14 of those 15 games. And a lot of it, his presence out there, very active, stick, good position. He's helped on the penalty kill, most stick checks in the NHL in the neutral zone. And then Korpisalo, what he's brought in net, under a 2 goals against average. Again, a lot of that support from his teammates and all that, but he's played very consistent, as has Phoenix Copley. So sometimes when you have a player like Jonathan Quick with his status and what he does and, what he's meant to a franchise, sometimes it's a little bit intimidating for other players to understand that. And sometimes when that presence is removed, other guys kind of, they just kind of relax a little bit. And, that might be the case. Jonathan Quick, a very intense presence. He's got nothing but win in his heart. And, we wish him nothing but the best of luck other than the games he plays against the Kings. But, the Kings have moved on. Again, he'll always be remembered. He'll always be remembered as a King, Jonathan Quick will. He'll never be forgotten for everything that he's done. Again, the Kings do not hoist that Stanley Cup at their first one in 2012 without Jonathan Quick. There's no mistake why he won the Conn Smythe Trophy. In 20 games, he allowed only 29 goals against, a 1.41 goals against average, a 946 save percentage. I mean, that stuff is unheard of. So that stuff will never be forgotten. But the Kings have moved on, and they're putting themselves in a position now. Again, they got themselves in the postseason, and they're looking to get back to the promised land again and win another Stanley Cup. And in this case, it'll have to be without Jonathan Quick.
We're going to take a big picture look at this entire season with Daryl Evans in a moment, but need to remind you real quick that today's episode of Locked on LA Kings brought to you by Athletic Greens. With one delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced superfoods, probiotics, adaptogens to help you start your day right. It's a special blend of ingredients that supports your health. your nervous system, your immune system. AG1 contains less than 1 gram of sugar, costs you less than $3 a day, and it's showing 1 scoop in a cup of water. That's it. No need for a million different pills or supplements to look out for your health. And to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NHL Network. That's athleticgreens.com/NHL Network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Wrapping it up with LA Kings radio analyst Daryl Evans. And Daryl, have you been surprised at how good the Pacific Division has been this season? A lot of people at the beginning of the season thought it maybe was the weakest division in the NHL, but we are seeing Calgary with a huge close to the season. They've got a big game coming up this week against Winnipeg. It's possible the Pacific could get 5 teams into the playoffs this season.
No, the Pacific Division has been very competitive. I think, when you look back at the early part of the year, the competitiveness was there, but maybe I'll use the word inconsistent. There are teams would go on streaks, go 4 or 5 games that look great, and all of a sudden they'd pull back a little bit. But I think what we've seen for the last basically month and a half, the top 3 teams, and you can't even push Seattle out of it. I mean, Seattle's been just hanging tight there all year. They've been very consistent in the way that they play. Arguably, maybe the most consistent team in the Pacific Division has been Seattle. Maybe they haven't had quite the burst that the other teams have had, but for a team just in their second year, they've had a remarkable year. But the 3 teams, I think they've done a great job at, pushing each other. You see one team win, you take a look over your shoulder, even though they say they're, you only worry about your own games. Everybody's well aware of what's going on, especially at this time of year. And it's a credit to all of them. They're all well-coached teams. They all have different elements that, kind of separate them from each other. And, we'll find out in soon enough time as to which one's going to be the one that's going to succeed and get the furthest out of that trio. And 2 of the 3 more than likely will end up playing against each other in a couple of weeks. So, but they've done a great job, and it's made it that much more difficult, for the other teams around, to come out this way and play. You got to raise your game to a high level. You got the offense in Edmonton. I think when you look at the Kings, they're definitely a more offensive team, but probably known more for their defensive play, at least in the second half of the year. And then Vegas is they've been getting some timely goals and some depth scoring from guys that they didn't expect to get from. And they've had some goaltending injuries through the course of the year. When Jonathan Quick went there, he came in and won a handful of games right off the bat. And that was a boost that maybe if that doesn't happen, they're not sitting there still knocking on the door at the top of the Pacific Division. So it's a lot of fun, but it just goes to show you how the parity in the NHL, how close everything is, and how competitive it is. And for these 3 teams, it's been playoff hockey. Vegas didn't make the playoffs last year, and the Kings and the Oilers met up in the first round, and Kings didn't get past that. So there's a lot at stake here in the next few weeks.
Looking back at this season for the Kings, they hit the 100-point mark, which obviously is a big deal. And I know everyone is hoping they can take that next step and advance out of the first round of the playoffs, but it's going to be difficult. Do you feel that there's definitely been another step taken, though, this season for the LA Kings, regardless of how the postseason turns out?
Without a doubt. Unfortunately, a lot of people measure success by how far you go in the playoffs. And let's face it, if you don't win the cup, there's only one team that does that. So there's 31 teams that are going to be disappointed every year. I think where you look at growth from the Kings, the addition again of Kevin Fiala, management did a great job. Rob Blake, Luc Robitaille, upper management ownership, committing a contract like that to a guy like Kevin Fiala, who comes in the prime of his career. He's going to be around for a number of years. He's going to have an impact on this team. The patience and growth of some of the young players. I mentioned Adrian Kempe through the show. Gabe Velarde's game's gone to a different level. They committed to Mikey Anderson an 8-year contract. And then, now the goaltending situation, it's always tough to start a new chapter in a franchise, especially when, you don't go through a complete rebuild, so to speak. The Kings have done a remarkable job in a short period of time of getting themselves back to being a real competitive team. They still have a ways to go to make themselves, a consistent contender, for a cup. But they're definitely on that path. So I think it's been a very good year. The power play has definitely improved. They have, 2 power play units now, where in the past it was always, coach had one set, one choice, one set of guys to go over the boards, and that was it. Now it's whichever unit's going, they're going to get the nod, and and there's a healthy competitiveness between those 2 units. A lot of different options. I think Jim Hiller's done a great job on that power play, adding some different things to it. The penalty kill is getting better, even though the numbers, the big numbers don't have a big difference right now. They dug themselves such a hole at the beginning of the season, but they've been coming up with some very timely penalty kills now, taking fewer penalties, more discipline. So I think the depth of the hockey club is come around. The growth. Quentin Byfield, who I mentioned as well, his game has come to a whole different level. He now shows that he's an NHL player. He can play on a night-to-night basis. So those are the good things that have happened. So I don't think, again, regardless of what happens, even if the Kings hadn't made the playoffs, of course, step back from where you were last year when you do get to the postseason, but sometimes it's one step backwards, 2 forwards. You do have to find a way to win in the postseason, and that's the next challenge it's on the table for the Kings right now, as it is for a lot of teams.
Well, we're hoping for a long playoff run by the LA Kings, and if that is the case, we'll definitely get you back on the show to talk about what's going on in the playoffs. But regardless, obviously, we really appreciate your time checking in with us during the season. And looking forward to hearing you and Nick Nixon on the call on the Kings iHeart Audio Network for the rest of the regular season and of the postseason as well. Daryl, great stuff. Always appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Eddie. Keep up the great work, and I look forward to catching up with you in the playoffs.
All right. That sounds good. I, again, hope to talk to you in several weeks from now. That'd be great. All right. Thank you, Daryl. That is Daryl Evans. And again, one of the best in the business, one of the nicest guys out there, and always super, super accommodating to this show and a lot of other shows as well. It's great to get his feedback on what's going on with the LA Kings. As we close it out, I want to remind you, coming up on tomorrow's show, obviously a recap of the big game against the Oilers coming up tonight. Don't forget, coming up on Thursday, we're going to have a fan feedback show. Your questions, your comments about everything going on with the LA Kings. You can send me an email with your questions or comments, lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. Also, you can make comments on the YouTube channel as well. I read all those comments, and we pick out some of those as well to have us on the feedback show. We're on Twitter @LockedOnLAKings and on Instagram @LockedOnLAKings as well. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.